So let's set the scene for the return of the Premier League. Everyone's played 3 matches. We've got 4 more games to come before the next international break, but we've got European football, Carabao Cup games in the mix over the next 3 weeks as well. Alongside me for this episode, we welcome back Nick Miller. How are you?
Hello, I'm very well. How are you?
Very good. Have you enjoyed the international break?
Yes, well, sort of. I went on holiday, so that was and kind of avoided sort of pretended football didn't exist for a week, which was I can recommend. It's a real palate cleanser.
Yeah, which I think many people who are devoted Premier League fans and league football fans probably did the same, even if they didn't have the joy of going away on holiday. Where did you go, by the way?
Bilbao,
which
lovely. I can recommend thoroughly.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Travel tips and football analysis from Nick Miller. John Mackenzie is here as well. Did you enjoy the international break?
I had a great time, yes. You know, I love international football, so I'm sated.
Excellent. Always with a kick of cynicism just to start the show. I do like it, John. Thank you very much indeed. So what have we got coming up this weekend? 8 games on Saturday, starting with pointless Southampton up against Manchester United, who I suppose if you're Cristiano Ronaldo would say that they are pointless as well. They're going head-to-head in the early game, 12:30 UK, that's 7:30 Eastern time. Then we've got 5 games at 3 o'clock, which is 10 o'clock Eastern, including both of the 100% sides in the league. The leaders on goal difference, Manchester City host Brentford, and then Liverpool up against Forest. Then at 5:30, that's 12:30 Eastern, Villa against the only other pointless team, that's Everton. Then at 8 o'clock or 3 Eastern, it's Bournemouth against Chelsea. Then on Sunday, we have the North London derby, Spurs against Arsenal at 2 or 9 Eastern, and Wolves against Newcastle, which is 4:30 or 11:30. And we've got a lot to come on all of the games this weekend with plenty of expert analysis from our team here at The Athletic. But let's focus on the grudge match in North London first up. So it's a fixture that's nearly always a cracker by the sounds of it. Last season, we saw a dramatic 2-2 at the Emirates, and then in the reverse fixture, Arsenal led 3-2. Spurs fought back for a nervy end to make it 3-2, and Arsenal were 3-0 up at half-time. It's interesting because that win for Arsenal, Nick, was one of 5 defeats in the last 7 for Spurs to end last season. This season, it's a draw against Leicester, comfortable win against Everton, and then a loss at Newcastle. So overall, for Ange Postecoglou, it's only 3 wins out of his last 10 in the Premier League. He needs, at the very least, a very, very good performance, if not needing a win in this one, just to get everyone sort of back enjoying him being the manager again.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? I mean, apart from the last few weeks of the season, there was a fairly objectively good season for Spurs, but because of the timing of the bad run, and then it's obviously spilled over into this season a little bit, then mood seems a little bit kind of pessimistic. I almost think it would have the worst result possible for Spurs is if they play quite well but don't win, because they sort of getting pumped by Arsenal would be bad. I think we can probably all agree on that. But if they sort of maybe dominate possession, they play quite well, but then don't score the goals that kind of domination might deserve, then that's kind of repeating a pattern that we've seen a couple of times already this season, Leicester and Newcastle to an extent as well. And it feels like that is the more that happens, the more that people will kind of think whatever Postecoglou is trying isn't really working. So they kind of do need a win, not in a sort of existential, well, Postecoglou is going to get sacked if they don't kind of thing. And I suspect there isn't much, even if they don't win and they go on a bit of a bad run, there's not much immediate prospect of that happening. But as you say, it's more of a kind of just getting everyone back on side, let everyone feeling a little bit better about themselves rather than anything too drastic.
Yeah, what's your take on that, John? Do you feel that his credit bank is sort of just running out of juice a little bit, or not?
I think so, yeah. I mean, certainly the fan base will be questioning what's going on. And I think we talked about this last week where we said the thing with Spurs at the moment is that it feels as though they have to grind and grind and grind to get goals. And yet the oppositions are scoring with like one chance, seemingly from nowhere. And I think that's a tough prospect for fan bases to have to deal with because, even if the performances are largely good, and I think that's what the argument is, right? It's that Spurs are largely dominating games and they are generating chances and they're not going in. But it's that tension I think the fan base find themselves in between. Why is it so hard for us to score compared to the teams that we're playing? So, yeah, I think a North London derby win would go a long way towards sorting the fan base out for a few more weeks. So I think it's pretty important for them to come away with something here.
And touching on what John said there, Nick, the fact that they've got Dominic Solanke all but certainly back, needing goals, needing that cutting edge, is it altogether a positive, or is it just feeling like, well, if he's at a big club and he's not going to be able to deal with the pressure, it could become too much for him? Where's your needle on this one? Do you feel that he's the missing piece of the jigsaw sort of vibes for Solanke or not?
Yeah, I mean, in theory he is. I mean, as John says, it seems to be taking them an awful lot of chances to score. They didn't have Solanke against Newcastle, and you kind of think maybe if he was in the team from the start, was in the team at all, then they would have been slightly better. Brennan Johnson did very well when he came on in that game, so I wonder if he might start this one again. But yeah, it is a sort of slightly odd one. He's not he's not this sort of okay, they bought Solanke, so that's definitely their goal scoring problem solved. He's a really, really good striker, and he scored a lot of goals last season. But you kind of the worry about him is that you've signed a striker from a kind of lower, in inverted commas, team that might not quite be good enough to do what they need to do. I like him. I think he will score goals for Spurs, but it might take him a little while to get going, particularly given that his start has been slightly disrupted by injury, and combined with the fact that all the stuff that we've been talking about before. If he doesn't start scoring goals, then people might start getting on his back, and of course this will all be kind of moot if he gets one or two on Sunday, and suddenly he's a hero. But yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah, we should probably give him a little bit of slack, seeing as he's only played one game. And
I don't want to write him off. It's not Solanke flop after one game. Yeah.
No, exactly. I think my initial question might have suggested that already, but I didn't mean it. 19 Premier League goals last season. Fingers crossed for him. We'll talk about Arsenal's absentees and analyse that situation as far as they are concerned a little bit later on, John. But with no Rice suspended, no Marino to come in, Odegaard now missing. Yeah, for people who weren't paying attention during the international break, Martin Odegaard injured for Norway, and it looks like a serious one that's going to keep him out for quite some time. That puts Spurs at a great advantage, doesn't it, in midfield, John?
I mean, yeah, in a football sense, yes, Spurs will be looking at this and thinking, actually, this is an Arsenal team that maybe they wouldn't have considered gettable at quite so easily, that are now looking a little bit more gettable at. It does change the dynamics of the game a little bit, though, insofar as now it looks... If you lose to Arsenal with their full strength 11, you can say, well, we lost to Arsenal, that they're a good team, they're challenging for the title, etc., etc. If you lose to Arsenal when they're missing their starting midfield, you have less of those excuses, and I think that Spurs will be going into this one thinking, well, we've got to do well here as well. So there's the added pressure of that. So yeah, I think it's one of those tricky ones where the dynamics change on the basis of what expectations are, and I think that Spurs will feel the pressure of winning this game because they'll be like, there's not going to be an easier chance for us to beat our main rivals this season, or maybe for a few seasons to come, so we need to take it. And I think also Arsenal, play quite well as underdogs. We saw that when they went down to 10 men against Brighton. I think they play quite nicely when they can just sit deep and then break, which I suspect we'll probably see them. I'd say sit deep, they'll probably block out a little bit more, be a bit more compact and just look for their moments to attack. I think that probably will suit them as well. So it's a funny one. Yeah, you'd say on paper advantage Spurs, but I would also say there's positives here for Arsenal despite the big negatives.
And how much of an advantage will it give them if they also have Mickey van der Ven back for them, John? Because he's such a... I know you talk about difference makers almost predominantly in the final third. He's a difference maker at the back, but he can be in the final third within a split second anyway, can't he?
Yeah, I mean, this is two teams with a lot of difference makers in the back line. So yeah, it'll be important for Spurs to have Van der Ven back. We saw what happens when he's not in the starting lineup against Newcastle. That the winning goal for Newcastle came from one of those big defensive transitions where we don't know what would have happened, but you feel as though had Van der Ven been in that back line making that recovery run, maybe things would have turned out differently. So Van der Ven super important for Spurs because they are so open at the back. There's a tactical decision there that they want to leave big spaces to defend and then have the defenders who can defend those big spaces. And when you miss Van der Ven, as we've seen in the few occasions in the last couple of seasons where he's been missing, Spurs do look a little bit more shaky.
Nick?
It is. I mean, yeah, it is on that subject. I mean, it does feel increasingly mad that Spurs didn't sign another centre back in the transfer window. I mean, that they have Dragusin and then Ben Davies is the next in line. I mean, it's quite a drop off from Van der Ven, and to a point, Van der Ven is you're going to struggle to find someone who can replace him, particularly as a sort of backup, because he has such a sort of fairly unique set of skills that is suited to how Postecoglou wants to play. But to sign, Wilson Odobert, who, very promising player, but they didn't need another winger. They've got quite a few of those. What they did need a sort of a slightly higher quality sort of depth in centre back. Dragusin is, I think there's a bit of a drop off, and he's kind of in a slightly unfair position because he signed for Spurs and then sort of barely played. That was one of the big when I was speaking to Romania fans before the Euros, one of their big concerns is that Dragusin just hadn't played for Tottenham. So to kind of now expect him to be thrown in and replace Van der Ven, and I know that's the nature of a kind of backup in any position, but it does feel like of the kind of key players in the sort of Premier League's bigger teams, the drop off from Van der Ven to the next best option is one of the bigger ones. Maybe only Odegaard to the next kind of similar option at Arsenal is is one of the other sort of comparables. But yeah, it feels like it hasn't. Maybe I've been missing it, and I confess I don't regularly listen to the Tottenham podcast, so maybe they've been talking about it a lot on there. But it just feels like under discussed how Spurs. One of the things of the transfer window was that Spurs didn't sign a centre back.
Well, it's funny you should say that about the Tottenham podcast View from the Lane, because let's check in with Charlie Eccleshare, who was speaking to Danny Kelly on the latest episode.
I think it's a good time to play Arsenal. I think and Spurs are, they will have a game surely where some of these chances they're creating go in and they kind of regress to the mean in terms of their finishing, their goal scoring matching up.
Sunday would be a nice
chances.
Place to start that process.
And Sunday would be a good chance. And I feel like if they can start quickly and aggressively, and I think they will, and I also feel they might benefit. Quite a few of those players weren't away on international duty. Guys like James Maddison, should be in pretty good shape for this. I think they can really go at Arsenal quickly, whip the crowd up. It could be a bit like that 3-0 Conte game, and suddenly they're against a team that are diminished. I think there's a real chance.
That's interesting from Charlie there, feeling that, Spurs do have that advantage. They'll obviously have the home crowd behind them. They might be sort of scenting blood in the water, the fact that Arsenal are depleted. Let's focus on Arsenal, John. The fact that Martin Odegaard is not going to be playing. You said recently that you felt like it was a ticking time bomb as to when he gets injured, how do Arsenal replace him? the bomb's gone off. How will they?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. As was mentioned before, the gap between Ødegaard and his replacement, I guess, who I assume we're saying is Ethan Nwaneri, is mad. I mean, Nwaneri's played I think 15 senior minutes for Arsenal in the last two seasons. Expecting him to come in and for a North London derby for a full debut, I think is maybe pushing the realms of reality a little bit. So I think what's going to have to happen here is some kind of shape change. I think they're going to have to tweak things a little bit. We saw last season that they did do that against Liverpool, I think in the FA Cup, where they went to a 4-4-2, 4-2-4 shape. And I think that will suit them as well, because in that shape they're able, as I said before, they're able to sit a little bit deeper, maybe just be a little less aggressive in terms of trying to possess the ball and dominate the game, but have this really nice just sort of shape to work out of and pick their moments to go forwards. And I think that's maybe what we'll see. And so rather than replacing Ødegaard, what we're doing is just taking him out of the team and just going with a two-man midfield and having two players in front of them, probably Havertz and one of Jesus or Trossard. So I think that's what will happen. I can't see any other way of them sorting out. I mean, the sort of oven-ready Ødegaard replacement was Fabio Vieira, and he's obviously not there anymore. So it is making Arsenal's squad depth look a little bit squeaky at the moment.
And I mean, Nick, from your point of view, Arsenal fans would be entitled to say, well, come on, look, yes, he's got a reputation for being there, not getting injured often, but you should have, like, you use the phrase oven ready, which is very Boris Johnson of you, John, which is fair play if you want to go down that road.
He doesn't own words, come on.
No. In terms of, what Arsenal did do during the transfer window, in the same way as you were questioning Spurs' backup in defence, they should have covered their tracks a little bit more, shouldn't they?
Yeah, possibly. And I don't think you really overthink, like, for example, selling Emil Smith-Rowe. They got good money for him. He wasn't, he wasn't getting in the team. He was probably stagnating personally, and they Fulham made them a good offer. And then Fabio Vieira was sort of the backup in a couple of positions and wasn't really good enough in either of them. So really what they needed was Fabio Vieira, but a sort of better version of him, someone who could play in Ødegaard's position and who could give Saka a rest every now and then. But it's the kind of the classic problem of trying to find a player who, if you're saying, well, you're going to be the kind of backup to both of these players, well, okay, that's Arsenal's two most important players probably, or two most important attackers. So you're trying to sell, assuming you can even find that player, you're trying to sell them the idea of being a backup. So it is. Yes, in theory, they probably should have got someone to fill those roles, but it's very, very difficult to do that, I think.
Yeah, it's easier said in hindsight, isn't it? Let's hear from Adrian Clark on our dedicated Arsenal podcast, Handbrake Off, on what he would like to see Arsenal and Mikel Arteta try on Sunday.
On the selection of Nwaneri, very quickly, or Sterling, I would love to see Arteta name at least one of those two in the team, whether it's giving Sterling a debut or whether it's showing faith in Nwaneri. I mean, it'd be amazing if it was both. I couldn't see a scenario with both. But if it's one or the other, that is positive vibes. That is exciting. And at a moment where we're all feeling a bit worried about, he's missing, just to go out there and go, bang, I've got faith in Sterling to be our match winner or Nwaneri to go and deliver, I think that will get everyone going, certainly the fans, but also the team, because it's fresh and it's new and it's positive.
Nick, were you surprised that Chelsea let Sterling go to Arsenal in particular? Obviously, they were literally kicking him out the door, but surprised to let him go there?
It's a couple of, I mean, you can deal with this on a couple of levels, really. Surprise if this was a kind of normal club who is getting rid of him, then yes, you will be quite surprised that they have given a still very good and not completely over the hill player to one of their key rivals, and oh, by the way, we're going to pay over half of his wages as well. That does seem quite mad for a kind of normal, sensible football club. But it's Chelsea, isn't it? So it's not. You kind of. You sort of when that came through, I remember a friend told me, "Oh, yes, it's happening," and you kind of the initial reaction was, "Oh, it's happening," and then you're going to go, "Yeah, okay, that makes perfect sense. Why not? Why wouldn't Chelsea just give one of this kind of excellent player with years of experience to one of their key rivals? It completely fits their kind of line of logic. So, yeah, not something I would have done, but it's not something that was a massive shock either."
And John, just give us a little memory refresh on Sterling in terms of what he can bring, what he can do, because the subplot or the subtext to his time at Chelsea almost seems to be focused on him hooning a free kick over the bar towards the end of last season, I think it was, and it was all very embarrassing, and that seemingly summed up his time at Chelsea. And from the outside, we're supposed to think, oh, well, that sums him up as a player, but that's not the case at all, is it?
No, it's an interesting one with Raheem Sterling, because I guess he's sort of caught between having had an incredibly successful career, mainly with Manchester City, an incredibly successful career with England, going to Chelsea, and then that sort of flipping the narrative on its head and saying, well, this is a guy who's now washed, who's now done. It's over, and the reality is probably somewhere in the middle. I suspect now for Sterling, and the question about whether or not Arsenal can get the most out of him, I think, will be, can they use him as a backup player and get as much as possible from him, and I'm sure they can do that. I think the trick is going to be managing his minutes, because this is a player who has an inordinate level amount of minutes. If you compare his age curve to most Premier League players' age curves in the same position, what you'll see is he's got the same amount of minutes as someone much older than him, because he's been playing from such a young age. So I'm a firm believer that age curves are sort of set once you've hit your minutes. Largely speaking, you can sort of track a player's trajectory in the professional game. So I think if Arsenal can manage his minutes well, then and I'm sure they will be able to, because they're a smart club, and they've clearly got the better side of this deal with respect to Chelsea. I think that we'll be able to see flashes of what we saw from him at Manchester City, which is of course a club where he worked with Mikel Arteta as well. So Mikel Arteta knows exactly how to use him. Arsenal are playing the sort of football that he will offer upside, so lots of possession of the ball in wide areas around where he'll be. There'll be lots of sort of quick attacking in those wide areas where his smart movement, his ability to come inside will be beneficial to Arsenal. And of course, Arsenal haven't really had a huge amount of backup in those areas as well. I mean, we've been talking for years about how Saka has been expected to play every minute as well. Sterling can play on both sides too, so you've got the possibility of using him behind Martinelli as well. So I think all in all, this will be a good transfer for Arsenal if they can manage Raheem Sterling's minutes, get him, I think, mainly coming off the bench, but there'll be certain games where they'll be able to use him from the start, and I'm sure that Arsenal will get the upside from him.
Prediction time, Nick?
Interesting. I think Arsenal will win 2-1.
John?
Yeah, this is a tough one, isn't it? It's there's so many variables that just aren't where you would expect them to be, that it's horrible to make a prediction. But I don't know. It's I'm tempted to go for a draw, another 2-2 draw.
Well, it would be in line. It would be in line with the recent history of the fixture for it to be a high-scoring draw. So we shall see, and we will reflect next week. Right, let's get stuck into the other games this weekend. This is an interesting one. Aston Villa against Everton. Onana up against his old side. Everton just really struggling at the moment, and you've even got the prospective new owner of the club, John Textor, saying that, oh yeah, we might, need to change things around. Can Sean Dyche, deal with me wanting to sign various players? It's all closing in once again at Everton, Nick. We shouldn't be surprised, really, should we?
No, they're kind of when you think that they have kind of found all of the ways to be a sort of tragicomic mess, then they just find another one. It's it's uplifting and for the rest of us in many ways, but not for them. I mean, I suppose you can look at if you're thinking positively, and I don't think there are too many Everton fans who are inclined to think positively, but you could argue that they played really well for 86 minutes or whatever it was last week, and should have won, and then they just kind of their heads exploded for the last 10 minutes. So if you wanted to think of things positively, you could just say, well, just play like, that was nearly a full game, wasn't it? So let's just play like that again and we'll be fine. The obvious sort of flip to that is that they didn't, it wasn't a full game. So they didn't play well for. So and they managed to, as I said, find new ways to kind of make a mess of things and make the fans feel bad about themselves. But if they play like they did in the first 86 minutes, I'm just kind of repeating it, it sounds more and more absurd. But if they play like they did for that 86 minutes against Villa, then, if they get a scrappy draw, it's the kind of thing that Sean Dyche teams, thrive on. But on more realistically, you kind of fear for them in this one with the kind of various options that Villa have, and I know Villa haven't been quite as good as they were the last season so far. But if Villa play well, they've got so many options that it's difficult to see anything other than them winning.
I just wanted to get a quick word from you, John, on Aston Villa, because obviously I mentioned at the top of the show that this phase of games will start to factor in Champions League football into their season in particular. How they deal with not necessarily just this next phase, but the entirety of the season playing high-caliber European football midweek rather than being able to rotate into the Europa or the Conference League or whatever is going to be a big test for them, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's worth thinking as well about the format change in the Champions League, because the Champions League now has 8 games in its group stages. If they get through that, which they almost certainly will, because you only have to finish in the top 24 teams, you then go into a double-headed playoff to get into the next round. So we're talking like minimum probably 10 games for Villa, unless something goes very, very badly wrong, which will take them through, to February, March time. That's an incredible amount of extra games to them to have on top of what they usually have. And so I think the even more so than in previous seasons, the way that they deal with that diet of Champions League fixtures is going to determine what they do in the Premier League season as well. So not only is that, I think, does that make this a must-win game for them? They have to pick up as many points as they can before they go into that run. But also, it's really hard to see how a team like Villa, a club like Villa, are going to deal with that change in format. There'll be a few clubs obviously in that kind of position, but really fascinating to see.
Let's talk about Wolves against Newcastle, which is the game after the North London derby. I think it was sort of widely regarded by Newcastle fans that it was a disappointing transfer window for them, but they're still unbeaten. And on the Pod on the Tyne podcast, which is our dedicated Newcastle podcast, Chris Woff highlighted Eddie Howe's side and their struggles on the road.
We know that Newcastle's away form is a big talking point, something that they need to address now. Actually, if you look at the run over the course of 2024, they haven't actually had as many defeats as maybe you would initially suspect, but the manager himself has discussed publicly and privately that it is an issue and that it is something that Newcastle need to address. And if they want to be competing for those very top positions in the Premier League, because if they can win at Wolves, I think that'll be huge considering the fixtures they have coming up. They've got Fulham away in the Premier League after that. They then go to Wimbledon, the Cups. They've got 3 straight away games. And then their run of home fixtures actually looks very, very tricky over the next couple of months. Obviously, it's Man City, the next match at St James's Park. So they do need to pick up some points on the road.
Yeah, and they will be hoping to do that against a Wolves side who have struggled so far this season, albeit they've had, a tough opening to the season with Arsenal and then Chelsea, and then they picked up that point against Nottingham Forest. But Gary O'Neill will just need to get a performance this weekend against Newcastle. It's on the telly as well, so the scrutiny will be even more. Let's focus on Manchester United. Talk of the Devil's crew, Laurie Whitwell, Carl Anker and Andy Mitten have given their views on Erik ten Hag's side and their lunchtime kickoff on Saturday against Southampton.
Manchester United have got to win. Southampton have started poorly. Just get rid of all the sentiment. It is just a must win.
If United press well, there are opportunities to score if they do it properly effective and cut off the ball into the wing backs. But Southampton, you want to be winning this by more than one goal. I want more than one goal. I want a clean sheet. I want to be done by 3:30. No messing.
As Carl said, I think United, they've got enough options, I would say, in attack to win the ball high. The way that Brentford attacked them when they were passing the ball out from the back, they scored. They just needed to be clinical. United, I know they've been missing chances, but if they will get chances against Southampton.
So it's must win. They have to win. It's going to be on the telly once again. Southampton, pointless, Nick. Erik ten Hag's been, getting criticism from Cristiano Ronaldo from Saudi Arabia. He's had to sort of bat that away. How does this feel to you, this game? Do you feel that, the guys there that we heard from are on the right page, that, they're going to get chances, they're going to pick up that win? Or do you sense a nervousness amongst Manchester United fans once again?
I mean, there's inevitably going to be a nervousness because we're all kind of at the stage of, right, well, if they don't beat these lot, then they really are in trouble. But yeah, what the guys were saying there is exactly right about Southampton. You don't want to be too kind of, Southampton can't play the way that they played in the Championship, and it's never going to work, and look at Burnley, all that kind of thing. You don't want to do that too much, but they have been. I suppose they could argue they were decent against Newcastle on the first day, but I was at their game against Forest in the second game, and Forest are not a team that presses particularly high, and they won the ball like in Southampton third 4, 5, 6 times without really kind of pressing that much. And you kind of, as they touched on there, you saw against Brentford that it just looked incredibly easy for Brentford to not even force the mistakes. It's kind of half force the mistakes. It's almost like sitting back and not sitting back, but sort of just waiting for the mistakes to happen. Just a little prod, and the mistakes will happen. And maybe Southampton will kind of improve as the season goes on. But yeah, I mean, if United as Carl mentioned and the other guys there, if United press in any kind of coherent and aggressive fashion, then they should win this by 2 or 3, I think. And yeah, as I said, if not, then we've really got problems.
Do you see any glimmer of hope for Southampton against United in the way that United have played? Because you did highlight how they pressed against Liverpool prior to the game, and that Liverpool would be able to break quickly. But does Southampton have those weapons to be able to do the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very different prospect to try and press Liverpool than it is to try and press Southampton. As Nick said, the issues that Southampton have seem to be often self-caused as much as prompted by opposition pressing patterns. So, yeah, I think that Southampton are going to struggle this season. I think that there's this conversation about should a team like Southampton even be trying to play in this way, with the assumption that it's just sort of all possession football is sort of lumped together, and that's if you're playing possession football, that's it. But part of the problem with Southampton is they're playing, in my opinion, pretty bad possession football. There's things that they do that, as we've said, are causing them problems in the build-up phase, which is meaning that teams like Brentford, Brentford aren't particularly well known for being an aggressive, high-pressing side. Obviously, against Southampton, they're going to try and engage it higher up the pitch than they might do for other teams. But Brentford had a field day with them, and largely off the back of the way that Southampton were trying to build. So I've seen lots of issues with what they're trying to do there. So this is a perfect game for Manchester United to sort of get back on track after a disappointing result against Liverpool.
Okay, well, we'll see how it all pans out. I remember watching Southampton in the Championship last season, and what struck me was that the pace of the way that they play, that they don't have the ability necessarily to really catch light and attack when they see those openings. So it's going to be even more difficult in the Premier League. However, Russell Martin wants to stick to his philosophy and says, well, no, there have been chances when we've created chances, we just haven't finished them, and that's what we need to do. So let's see how that one pans out. Let's focus on Bournemouth against Chelsea. Our Chelsea podcast, straight out of Cobham, Liam Toomey was speaking about how the international break may well have helped Enzo Maresca.
There are some very interesting decisions, and that's before you even get to how ready is Sancho. I mean, he was with United in their pre-season, but it always felt like that was partly United maintaining a negotiating pretense that he was involved in their plans rather than actually being central to their season preparations. So these 2 weeks will have been important, I think. Maresca will have had a few players to work with, and we'll see if not only quite a few of those players are in good condition to feature, but maybe Maresca's had a bit more time to translate a few of his ideas on the training pitch with those players.
By rights, Nick, what Liam's saying there is true. It should help Enzo Maresca, embed his philosophy even more. And he's going to come up against a side in Bournemouth that have a very clear identity and seem very settled. So it will either be a mismatch or Chelsea will have sort of gone up a level, whoever they're going to play, including Jadon Sancho.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of admire anyone who has any kind of firm opinions about what Chelsea are going to look like from game to game, because I mean, I don't know. They've looked all right in some games this season. They obviously gave Wolves a good hiding. It almost feels like Noni Madueke being so good has sort of complicated things slightly, because he was brilliant in the one position that they did seem to have that they didn't really need to worry about last season. So, if you're keeping him in the team, that means moving Cole Palmer, and I'm sure Cole Palmer can adjust to playing, 15 yards further in field. But just who's going to play, who of their very many kind of imperfect options is then going to play on the left, and then there's Nicholas Jackson in the midfield, and I don't know. I just find it incredibly difficult to get a real handle on what Chelsea are going to be like on the pitch. I mean, off the pitch, you just kind of you sort of know what to expect because it's chaos. You just expect madness all over the place, and we've seen with the great reporting that the Chelsea guys from the Athletic have done this week what's going on in the kind of boardroom and with the ownership situation. But yeah, on the pitch, who knows really. I'm supposed to be. I feel like I've been asked on a podcast to give certain opinions and be really sure about what I think. But I think sometimes it's just okay to admit you don't know.
Yeah, we do know what Bournemouth are going to bring, don't we? And we love it, don't we, John?
We do love it. We do love it. This is it's one of those interesting weeks in the Premier League where it feels like all of the top six, or the big six, I should say now, have winnable fixtures. So it's kind of interesting to see how those will play out. I think Chelsea maybe have got the hardest winnable fixture out of the lot here. Bournemouth are obviously a very good side and I think a very different side, and so it will present a very different challenge to Maresca as well. Lots of verticality, lots of direct attacking, lots of high pressing, the possibility of hitting them on the break in return. So I think it sort of sets you up with a different kind of challenge. So it'll be fascinating to see how they come out of that. But this is definitely one of those fixtures which can be a bit of a banana skin for the bigger sides. We saw Bournemouth cause a lot of problems for some of the bigger teams last season in particular, just by dint of the fact that they do play in such a different way. They create this sort of chaotic environment, and they are very well set to be able to exploit that kind of chaotic environment. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this one, as I always am with Bournemouth fixtures, but I think that the Chelsea angle on it will make it quite a tasty one.
Just very quickly, verticality means from end to end, doesn't it, on a football pitch?
I regretted using that word as soon as it came out of my mouth.
Because you watch it from side to side, but you obviously don't play But that means end to end, yeah.
And so you won't see Bournemouth doing like a huge amount of like build up stuff. That what they're going to try and do is they're going to try and keep the opposition stretched by just playing long balls from the goalkeeper, from the centre backs, not let them settle really, and then the game becomes a bit frenetic. And then in theory, I guess they should be better set up to deal with those kind of conditions than their opponent, especially when you're playing a big six team who wants the game to slow down and generate control and possession, etc.
So verticality is direct play. Good, thank you. Let's switch on to Liverpool. Let's check in with our dedicated Liverpool podcast, Walk On. James Pearce talking about rotation against Nottingham Forest.
We've not been in this position with Slot yet in terms of how he's going to approach the quick turnaround in terms of Saturday afternoon against Forest and then Tuesday night they're in the San Siro against AC Milan. But it's certainly going to be different, isn't it? I think for those players who probably went away frustrated going into the first international break of the season, having not had much of a look in, you think about Núñez and Gakpo at the top end of the pitch, Curtis Jones obviously coming back from injury, and Wataru Endo in midfield, and then Kwanzaa Gomez, Lee Bradley and Tsimikas. They're going to be needed now in the coming weeks. I think there's no doubt about that. If it's not in midweek against AC Milan, the following week, obviously, they've got that cup tie against West Ham coming up in the Carabao Cup. I'd be surprised if he changed much, if anything, from the starting 11 against United, just because as long as everyone comes back fit from the internationals, you're almost like a case of why would you want to tinker with that with one eye on midweek when you just want to take care of business against Forest first?
For a moment there, I thought James was sort of implying that Liverpool had their eyes on the horizon and they weren't concentrating on the peril that Nottingham Forest could bring to Anfield. But he did settle on the fact that, let's see if Arne Slot is just going to keep on ticking along with that, very steady approach that we've seen so far. For the Liverpool fans tuning in to this and listening and thinking, right, we need to just keep on and keep on and keep on and keep tabs on Manchester City. They'll be interested to get the take from you, Nick, on where maybe Nottingham Forest can cause Liverpool problems. Apart from Chris Wood, who's a goal-scoring machine, what can Forest do to Liverpool which might cause them problems?
I mean, the kind of obvious one at the moment is on the wings. I mean, Callum Hudson-Odoi and to a slightly lesser extent, Ante Elanga have been really, really good in the first few games. Elanga is sort of impressive and more in kind of bursts than throughout the whole game. But there's a real kind of weird. It's just a weird optimism that a lot of Forest fans seem to have at the moment, which is kind of unsettling on one level, but also quite logical because there are the team is quite well set up for those to kind of make the best of those wide players. Elliot Anderson has started really well in central midfield, and he's been quite good at getting the ball quickly to Morgan Gibbs-White, who then does what he does and kind of gets the ball again out quickly to those wide players. And then there's obviously, as you mentioned, Chris Wood in the middle to finish the chances that they create. So that's the obvious place that they could, in theory, hurt Liverpool. I am saying in theory in kind of quite a loaded way there. I don't think Liverpool will have too many problems in beating Forest at the weekend, but there are certainly kind of areas that they can hurt Liverpool, and the pace that those two wingers have. The obvious thing is that they are quite well suited to playing on the counter attack. So, which is again in theory the way that you would a lesser team going to Liverpool. That's the way that you would set up and the way you would kind of hurt them. I mean, in the last two seasons that Forest have been in the Premier League, the problem there has been defending. If you're playing on the counter attack, you're going to spend a lot of time defending, and the defense hasn't quite been strong enough. But there's a sort of burgeoning partnership in the centre of defence with Murillo and Nikola Milenkovic, who both look really, really good so far, and they complement each other quite well too. So, there are maybe the reasons for optimism aren't quite so illogical. But that said, I'm not sure that there's a huge amount of hope of Forest getting a result on Saturday, sadly.
Liverpool, you've sort of half-heartedly been warned to accept a slightly more difficult victory than before.
Forest might not get completely humiliated. Roared Miller.
Well, we shall see. Nick, thank you very much for your company today.
No problem.
And to you, John, as always, thank you.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Indeed, it has. Just a reminder: all of the podcasts that we've dipped into here and there on the preview, all available on the Athletic FC, alongside the Tactics podcast. You've got the Totally Football Show. You've got the Daily Football Briefing as well, and we're here every weekday here on the Athletic FC. Thanks to Nick, thanks to John, thank you for listening, for watching on YouTube as well. We'll be back on Monday. Have a great weekend.
If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search the Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.